Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 882. 882. It's the pre-show. It's that marvelous, magical time where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say outrageous things. If you're looking for the show content, move the slider over about 10 minutes and you'll get there. But this is the pre-show. You don't know what you might miss here. So I think everybody's been invited. Let me get the embed code locked in here so we can put this on television. And we'll get things all cranked up. This is for the 12th of December, 2022. Hard to believe we are rapidly approaching the end of the year, but it is what it is. All right. So, let's see if we can make all this magic happen here. All right, let me change the view here, and I think we're good to go. Yeah, Christmas is 13 days out, T-minus 13 days and counting. I'll start my Christmas shopping probably December 23rd. The best time to go Christmas shopping, it's Christmas Eve at the Walgreens because everybody's in a good mood and everybody's happy it's kind of over. And at Walgreens at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve, you got everything you'd ever want to buy right there. I mean, everybody, a gift for everybody's in that store. So that's when I like to Christmas shop is the Walgreens on Christmas Eve. And I don't think we got Christmas on a weekend this year. Christmas is on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. So I will not be on television Christmas Eve, which is different than usual, but that's okay.
You're still okay with running Janice Chestnut's story with Ken Osborne in the morning that day?
Yeah. So this is the recording from last year. Is that the deal? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just set it to roll at 8 o'clock, December 24th.
Okay.
We can do that. That's easy. And then we've got a Thursday night special, not this week, but next week. And that will be the show for December 26th. We'll do it on the 22nd. And then we'll get back on the regular schedule there as we start 2023. I think it's amazing. We have not missed a show here in almost 17 years. We had a fresh show every week for 17 years.
Thanks to you being our metronome. Come say hello to everybody, sweetie.
Are you talking to me or James here?
Both of you, my two sweets.
That's very, very disturbing. Very disturbing.
I was trying to improve the look of the show there for a second, but she wouldn't come on television.
Where's my penalty flag?
I figured out what the red flag was for finally.
Yeah.
It's for a replay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. Thank you, James. That's a really good idea. I love these progressive commercials where they go back and go to the replay in an everyday situation. Those are pretty funny.
Always make the poor husband look like the idiot, which is probably
usually the case.
And it's the correct strategy for long-term happiness.
True.
Just admit you're wrong. Move on.
Yeah, don't get the replay flag pulled out.
No.
That could never end well. And now tonight it's the prayer raid instead of the air raid, James, for Coach Leach.
That's just horrible.
Yeah, it's just not good. There's nothing good about it.
He's such a good guy.
And just the way he just, I don't know, he acted like he didn't care, but he did. And he said some of the most unbelievably treasured things that were just so awful.
No, his whole press conferences are like the pre-show here. I mean, it's where we say, we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. That's what this guy does, and he doesn't really care.
No, and, I mean, who would admit keeping a poleaxe next to his bed? He said one time, burglars, somebody breaks in, they expect you might have a gun, but they don't expect you to have a poleaxe. What?
The greatest Mike Leach video ever was cargo shorts. That's
Yeah.
all I wear is cargo shorts. I mean, anybody that knows me, if I'm not at a school or, TV or some public deal, I'm in cargo shorts, and he's got it right. You can put your lunch in different pockets in there. I mean, I used to coach baseball, boys baseball, when our kids were younger, and I got lineup cards, I got baseballs in there. I got everything in there. I got snacks, got water. Cargo shorts are the absolute greatest. He got it right in that video. He nailed it. And out of all the, and it says, did you see the one about coffee? That was pretty good.
Yeah, coffee. Why the reporter needed to elope instead of having a wedding, and
Yeah.
what's the best Halloween costume? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so great.
So
Truly
somebody needs to put a super cut of all these things together and just make it a primetime special or something, because and he made people laugh, and
Yes.
people just don't laugh anymore. Everybody's mad and, hey man, Trump and Biden and all this stuff, and it's just like, if you can get your mind off of politics for 5 minutes and laugh, life would be a whole lot better. And it's funny stuff. But we're still waiting on is of Showtime here. He's in critical condition in Jackson. And I also wonder why they flew him to Jackson instead of Birmingham. We're a large med market here with an incredibly strong level 1 trauma center at UAB. And I think it would be quicker to fly him here. You're a pilot, James. I mean, and it might have had something to do with weather. We had low clouds and, ceiling visibility problems. And maybe that had something to do with it.
And I wonder, I mean, how far are they from Memphis, or what that time difference by flight is? I don't know.
Birmingham
probably about equidistant, a little closer to us, I would think.
I bet weather was a big issue.
Yeah, I
guess
we
were ceilings in the 300, 400 feet range a lot of the time.
But that was just bad news. So, and life is short.
I don't have the guest, James, so
we have no guest.
Well, Kim's in charge of them, and so I expected she would invite them. Let me pull up the show notes and see if I can gen out an invitation here. She may be detained.
Been dealing with 384-hour snow map people all day today.
Oh, dude. Oh. It's like a regional epidemic.
It's and again, I've just had to kind of post over and over. The pattern looks really, really, really cold. Yes.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I can't tell you anything. And Uncle Bob's, Facebook weather page and all these other ones, they just and it's that horse is out of the barn and it's never going to come back in. I know that, but man, it's frustrating. So
it's kind of, and I fire off a couple of tweets showing maps of severe weather risk for the next 24 hours here. And then then it's kind of the low signal to noise ratio about everything. If it's not the severe weather, it's the snow, it's the chill. It's all coming at us. What's for dinner, Bill?
Mandarin orange.
Ah.
All right, the guest has accepted.
But I do note it's we've seen some minus 80 Fs in Siberia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if people knew how bad the GFS is in the winter in this part of the country, especially my part of the country, they would stop. Maybe they wouldn't. They would just do it anyway. What am I thinking?
That won't stop anybody.
No.
The one of the runs showed snow here Christmas Eve, and
yep.
I've been dealing.
We were just looking at one that had
day.
We had a -2 for the 2-meter temp in Lake Charles, Louisiana, Christmas morning. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, and it's look. I tell people, look, the pattern looks cold. I mean, how cold we don't know yet, but it sure does look cold. And it is true that there's some degree of an analog to 1983. And in 1983, here the high was 18 and the low was 2 at this low latitude.
I have a spreadsheet of all the winter records and streaks, and so many 1983 entries are still on there. I remember it. It's awful. We had 2 inches of snow that lasted 10 days. It sublimated. Terrible.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
Troy's on. Troy, just write Boomer Sooner on all those papers and send them back.
What on all these? All these grades here and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Oh man. No, trying to get that done. This has been kind of a bummer of a day, a lot of stuff going on, and trying to take care of that. And I've got to get the grades entered sometime tonight. So I've just got to get them done. So
just flunk them all. Give them all an F. They're done.
oh, there were some that took care of that themselves. So
They didn't need any help, did they?
Fit them to a bell curve and be done.
Let's
Joseph-
welcome our television
Joseph is-
viewers
yeah.
real
Hey,
quick.
Joseph.
For those watching on the television side, we're about to start the show here. So let's see who's in the room here. Joseph, can you hear us?
I can, loud and clear.
Okay, very nice. I think the
He's
gang's
tested.
all here. So let's get this thing going here. So recorder number 1 and recorder number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
What kind of a big deal? You heard it from Bill Curtis. This is WeatherBrains, episode number 882, the weekly show that is all about weather at the most marvelous time of the year. This is for December the 12th, 2022, about to enter 2023 very soon. The year has flown by. Troy, and you're busy tonight, but you managed to join us for a few mementos. You got a lot of irons in the fire tonight.
yeah, I've got grades that have got to be into the computer system, and it's a hand enter thing. And then as a lot of people will know on here, it's you enter those grades and you go back over them again, and then you end up going over them again and again and again, 3 or 4 times, just to make sure you got everything right. So I wanted to come on and say hello to Joseph, because we haven't had a chance to talk much, and he's been a great help to the AMS lately. And I just wanted to thank him for that as part of our CBM exam journey. Being on the CBM exam review committee, I will know, and Joseph knows this, that about 2 days ago, the AMS proud to announce to AMS headquarters that any folks that want to take the CBM exam now, we have a live and out there Spanish version of the exam now. We're the first in our portfolio, professional affairs, Mike, and up in Minneapolis, and that group of people. And there's so many people that worked really hard on this to make it happen. And Joseph, you're one of them, and I do appreciate your help.
Hey, Troy. No, it's a collective effort. I can't thank you enough for reaching out and really, truly trying to institutionalize just multilingual information. I think it's a huge victory for all of us. We all benefit from it. And yeah, just so honored to work alongside you and all of our colleagues here in the Weather Enterprise. So super exciting stuff.
Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate that. But around here, a little rain today, and highs in the mid and upper 60s. I think about a week and a half or 2 weeks from now, we'll be wishing for this across a good part of the United States, based on what we're seeing. Too early to call it, but it looks like cold weather for the balance of the year in many areas.
A lot of people are throwing out the analog of 1983.
Yeah.
And for most people listening to the show, they were not alive in 1983. But I will tell you that at least where we are here, and again, we're a pretty low latitude state here. In Birmingham, the high was 18. Christmas Day, the low was 2 above 0.
Yeah. We had thunder snow here in Austin that year during the winter weather events. We had thunder snow here in the city of Austin. So,
wow. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little later in the show here. But let's go up to Jen. Jen, how you doing? How's life in Ohio?
Hey, I'm good. It's already cold here. We're just going to keep getting colder, I think. No, I'm good. I'm watching the radar in this place called Kansas tonight, which we haven't seen a whole lot, but I'm watching some storms of fire and nothing severe, which is good. But I'm on call for parts of western Kansas near Hayes. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it and seeing what's happening. But we haven't seen storms. Well, you certainly don't see it in December. That does not happen very often. So.
Jenna, I'll swap with you. You want intergrades and I'll handle radio. I mean, you know.
Sure. You go for it. Yep.
Yes. So, see, and that's the thing, people that are watching or listening for the first time, we all have real jobs, and we often have to kind of, take care of business first. And we kind of have to kind of multitask here. So Troy and Jen are doing that tonight, and Kim always multitasks every Monday night. And I'm going to hold you, Kim, because you're going to be interesting our guests here. So hang on. Let's go. Let's see. And we got Rick Smith on the line. Rick, you're going to turn cold Christmas. Is that the deal there? You're going to get slammed.
That's what I saw on TV earlier today. So yeah, it looks like right now, Kim and I and Joseph and maybe a lot, we're it's like living in a humidifier today. It's like, it's just damp and showery and drizzly, and may actually get some severe weather early tomorrow morning. So we're kind of keeping a close eye on that. Maybe some of the dreaded QLCS tornadoes, especially down south of here. But, it's always something.
Yeah, it's and again, should see a blizzard, I guess, up in parts of Nebraska and South Dakota and maybe Wyoming. It's your classic low coming out of the Rockies with severe storms to the south and east and blizzard conditions north and west of there. So for the weather weenies and dweebs, it's going to be a very interesting few days to watch the weather for sure. So James A. in Tulsa town, what you got? 3 feet of snow for Christmas? What's your forecast there?
Oh, no.
No, we better not get 3 feet of snow. We have plans usually on Christmas mornings that we just run the video of the Yule log in the fireplace burning so we can give crews some time off and our news team, but normally don't get holidays off. So if we have a blizzard, that's going to create lots of unhappy Christmas spirit. But I mean, it's going to be cold. Like you said, I don't think it's 1983 cold, but the analogs are certainly interesting.
Yeah, the pattern, the analogs, the Siberian temperatures, it all looks like everything is kind of lined up here to turn cold.
Hey, James.
Bill Murray, yes.
Did you and James, has everyone seen, I saw this on the map email list today about this, some of the models, 1070, 1078 millibar highs. That's come off a little bit, but that was actually in some of the map discussions today. I think European at one point had 1078, but it's come back since then. But that's coming out of Canada and toward the U.S.
Once I saw the minus 2 meter temp at Lake Charles, I closed the browser.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, no, I will say some of the raw numbers do look horrifying. I mean, just, people down here have been griping, hey, man, it's too warm. I need some cold. I don't think they're looking for this kind of cold, but it's going to be very interesting to watch the weather for the next 2 weeks. So Bill Murray's having dinner. Bill, what you eating there? Sushi or what you got going on?
Tonight it was actually Chinese food from a fast food Chinese place. And it gave me an interesting fortune. I think it was something to the effect of someone is thinking positively of you right now. And I thought, well, they're probably not snow fans. So on this date, in 1962, James, it was 18 at Tampa. We were 6 that morning. So that was a big cold outbreak in 1962 that devastated the agricultural crops in Florida, and it was quite an event. So yeah, it's we can get it here this time of year too. Sure.
Yeah. In fact, if we have time tonight, we'll look at some of the ensemble output toward Christmas. And again, we're doing the show here on December 12th, so Christmas is 13 days out. But man, it looks cold. But let's go to Kim, who is going to be introducing our guest as she multitasks like nobody else with children and everything else. I remember those days.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of people here have multitasked a good bit in their day. Definitely my turn to do it, but it's always a joy when you get to multitask and work with people like Joseph, who I will be introducing shortly. Joseph Trujillo Falcone is a doctoral student at the University of Oklahoma Department of Communication, and he works as a researcher with the Behavioral Insights Unit at the Severe Storms Lab. He's already making huge waves in the weather world for his fantastic work in Spanish language, weather risk communication. We just saw one of those efforts highlighted a couple of minutes ago. It's just one of many things Joseph does for our community. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Yo, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. This is part 2 of our series, remembering the December 10th, 2021 tornado outbreak in the Mid-South. Last time we talked with weather service forecasters and broadcasters who covered the event. Today we're going to focus on a few populations that were heavily affected by the outbreak: immigrants and people for whom English is not their first language. Joseph went with my research team when we went out late last winter to examine this event from multiple perspectives, including public perspectives. And we'll discuss that in a moment. But first, Joseph, let's learn a little bit more about you. And all of this background will help set up your approach to the research and how it was you were able to accomplish the wonderful things that you did. So to get us started, you have a really interesting origin story. Tell us about the winding road that brought you into this field. Where are you from originally?
Well, I was born along the coast of Peru, Lima, Peru. And, I was there for about 5 years until I moved here to the United States. And goodness gracious, what a huge, huge swing of things that was. The climate over there in Lima, Peru, I mean, we're lucky to even have any rain altogether. And so when I moved to DFW, suddenly the sky started exploding and I was just like, what's going on? Like thunderstorms, tornadoes, hail, like everything just came all at once. And like, really, it was the fear that drove me into the meteorology field, just because I was just not having it. Like I was still like, even like 12, 13 years old, a teenager, still very, very afraid of thunderstorms, just because I've never really got to hone in on the concept the sky can explode like that. And, it's that curiosity that led me to really get more involved in it. And growing up, I grew up in an immigrant household and a community, and I love them so much. And, I started realizing that, and experiencing a lot of the language and cultural inequities firsthand, not knowing English sometimes can limit us from taking protective action, but also just the culture altogether. I was never really, growing up in Peru, there was never really a culture being aware of the weather altogether. And so, initially I wanted to be a bilingual broadcast meteorologist. I wanted to be on television, on Telemundo or Univision, and going out there and trying to give the weather in both languages. But, in the middle of all the green screen takes, I started noticing the translation issues, and also just the fact that there wasn't that many resources for a bilingual meteorologist to thrive in the field. Many of them graduate, get their bachelor's degree completely in English, and are suddenly expected to snap it into Spanish a week or two later. And I think, with all that said, I was just like, if I were to go into the field right now, I'd be a little frustrated. There has to be some change within our own system to really address other languages than English. And that's what brought me to Kim. Now I work within CERO and the NOAA National Severe Storms Lab, and really get to dig into these vulnerabilities, and really from a more personal side too, because I've lived most of it myself.
Yeah, let's explore that a little bit more. Thank you for that great background. And by the way, in the chat, you already have one job offer standing to be a broadcaster if you'd like. So that's got to be a record quick interview process that you just undertook. Like, I answered one question.
Run, Joseph.
Oh, great,
Run.
I'm hired. Okay. Yay! So let's keep it going. By the end of this, you're going to be like the president of the United States. Okay, so you mentioned that you moved from Peru to Dallas, Texas. Can you tell us a little bit more about life as an immigrant in Texas? What's that community like?
It's a community like no other. We're tight knit. We take care of each other. It's really funny, actually. Growing up, like, yes, my heritage is Peruvian, but the community I grew up in was mainly Argentinian. So like I was eating empanadas left and right, had my Lionel Messi jersey, even though I was Peruvian. My family looked at me confused and everything. But there's such a beauty to immigrant communities. These communities don't often have these sorts of resources at hand. And really, we just take care of each other. It's very collective. It's very unified. Even growing up, being one of the only ones to speak English, I would, translate documents for other people in my community and things like that. And I just think it's just a collective and beautiful community altogether. We take care of each other. We acknowledge things might not be available for us, but we do with what we have, and we work together all the time. Even to this day, I'm here in Oklahoma, and I can go back to my community back there in DFW, and we'd still be just as close as we were even just a couple of years ago.
That's great. And speaking of closeness, I'll reference your undergrad. You did undergrad at Texas A&M, which gives you the heartfelt support of one Troy Kimmel down here in one of my squares, and probably a whole bunch of our listeners. I got the chance to meet you when you were still an undergraduate, and you have always been interested in not just meteorology, but the intersection with society, and especially with policy. You've long been interested in how can we create policies to better inform people and make more resilient communities. You were involved even just as an undergraduate looking at the National Flood Insurance Program. Is that right?
That is very correct. Was something that really throughout my undergraduate, when I was a senior, of course, being just right along in College Station, Texas, Hurricane Harvey affected a lot of communities, and that really opened my eyes. I wasn't actually trying to go into communication at all. I was just in a public speaking class, just trying to get my credits. And then my wonderful professor, Dr. Charlie Conrad, was straight up like, well, it makes sense that, of course, there's a communication issue of messaging when it comes to Hurricane Harvey, but you need to look a little bit deeper and look at the organizations and the policy that's actually happening in the background. And, we hear the word natural disaster all the time. And something that I learned throughout this experience is that disasters aren't natural. They're caused by systemic inequities. They're caused by policies that are in play, by certain regulations or lack of. And so a lot of my undergraduate thesis really focused in on the policies and the organizational decisions that led to a lot of the catastrophe experience there. And we really got a closer look, into the Army Corps of Engineers and the decisions they made. And also how, yes, the National Flood Insurance Program may be slightly outdated to address a lot of the issues that are only going to become increasingly more important in the future. And that was the first dose of it. We visited communities in Houston afterwards as well, just to do a couple of interviews and just meet people in the area. And you can already tell, even just a couple of months afterwards, that some areas were already rebuilt while others were still very much struggling. And so you could see that with your own eyes. And that's truly what motivated me to pursue graduate level research, because there's so much power in research and really highlighting a lot of these things and putting them forward.
Let's bring all that energy back to the immigrant communities for just a moment. Do immigrants have different kinds of concerns from Native populations when disasters strike?
I think we even need to go back to and zoom out really to just the concept of weather in general. I mean, you could really take it back to my own experience of, in Peru, we'd never really experienced, thunderstorms altogether, and not the heavy ones here at least. And sometimes I know we've done a lot of great work on translation, making sure that the language also meets the user's needs, but we also have to acknowledge that culture of weather awareness isn't the same in Latin America or other places in the world. So you could technically translate a lot of words into another language, but if they don't understand the true significance of it, will they really go ahead and take action? And so one example I always like to highlight is actually, I work with linguistic experts that know the different varieties of Spanish. And one that really raised my eyebrow is that there's places in South America where the word tornado isn't associated with what we have it here. In places in South America, the word tornado was actually just a strong gusty wind that isn't really supposed to be any very significant altogether. And so it helps contextualize that coming from different cultures and backgrounds, we may have a very different perception of what, weather really does and whether we need to be aware of it or not. And tying this to the field work that we did in Kentucky and in Arkansas, we noted a lot of people that were just like, yeah, checking the 7-day forecast isn't part of my routine. And because of that, of course, people weren't going to get those messages well in advance that something was incoming and imminent towards their community.
Absolutely. So much to unpack from all of that. And I'm curious of your thoughts on, in this country, what has Spanish language weather communication been like here? If you even were to set aside the differences in attention the populations are bringing to the topic, can you receive good weather information as a Spanish speaker? And how might that communication infrastructure sort of differ from what we have in U.S. broadcast? In English broadcasting in the U.S.
We've come a long but very long way. The first time that a language inequity, like a death as a result of information in another language, you can trace it back all the way to the 1970s. That was the first time the Weather Service acknowledged it, or back then the Bureau of Meteorology. And, they acknowledged that because information wasn't provided in someone's native language, they didn't take shelter, and thus a casualty occurred. And, translations have been around the Weather Service for quite a while. We actually had a recent conversation with the WCM of the WFO San Juan in Puerto Rico, and they don't have an official record of it, but they're trying to find one. But they can trace it back to the 70s when translations first started happening in Puerto Rico. It didn't make it to the mainland United States till a couple of decades later, when John Morales was the first bilingual broadcast meteorologist here in the U.S. and started bringing that perspective in. And, it even goes back to what I was saying before, back in Latin America, weather anchors aren't as respected as meteorologists here in the US, just because there's no active weather and there's nothing to gain that sort of consensus from. And a lot of the times it's not deemed as a profession really that involves a lot of science. And I think that was one of the first things we had to address as an enterprise, and why I'm so excited why now the CBMs can completely be done in Spanish, to really integrate that science into the field of broadcast meteorology. And, ever since John Morales paved the way here in the mainland US, efforts have only expanded. We now have, various stations in big cities where there are an abundant amount of Hispanic and Latino populations from, Telemundo and Univision are doing a great job at that. Of course, we also have national chains. The Weather Channel in Espanol recently debuted this last year to give information out in Spanish. You have other like digital platforms like My Radar that also give complete coverage in Spanish nowadays. And, we've come such a long way. And even last year, the FCC supports Spanish language WIA messages, it's not fully implemented yet. So we still have a long way to go. But I do think compared to even just 1 or 2 decades ago, we have much more information available. But something that we do have to acknowledge and still realize is that information gaps still exist. I mean, give the Kentucky field study as a prime example, because during that day, let it be known that there was no Spanish language programming, whether that be on radio or television. And so if you don't have that information available to you, how are you going to respond altogether?
Hey, Joseph, you just led in perfectly to my question. Most major metro areas have dedicated and primary Spanish language radio and television, and in some cases, newspapers too, but a lot of medium and small markets do not. Does that mean more informal social networks for sharing weather information like this than larger cities, or are those social networks still in place in bigger metros?
That's a wonderful question. And it's something that we really dug into our field study, because I was truly fascinated by it. I mean, even myself, I grew up watching Nestor Flecha on television and Albert Martinez on Univision and Telemundo for Nestor. And for areas in Kentucky, like in Arkansas, for example, we would talk to all these people and say, there isn't any information available in my language. So a lot of them won't just won't even tune into a news station in English. It's pretty hard to comprehend, of course, and especially during a severe weather event when there's a lot of nerves in play, like it's very hard to truly take grasp of that message. And so to answer your question, yeah, they really depended on informal networks. And what we really found through this field work was that, yeah, no, they weren't depending on what we consider a quote unquote official. They were looking for more community expertise, people that not have only just helped them in with weather information in the past, but also have helped them in other cases too, whether it be something legal, whether it be something childcare related. And so you'd often have these community leaders that have a lot of influence in making sure that information gets to them, but a lot of them weren't specialized in meteorology or emergency management, and technically aren't qualified to recommend actionable recommendations. A lot of them are learning along with the community itself. And I think that's just so fascinating. It's something we have to elevate, that a lot of metropolitan areas here in the United States have ample now amounts of access to Spanish language information, but there's areas across the US and smaller markets where that just isn't a reality. And, a lot of the times that's also where the Latino populations are growing. Even in the Kentucky field study, the tornadoes passed through areas where the Latino population doubled in just the last 10 years. And that's just to put it into perspective.
Joseph, this is fascinating. And I told you many times before how much I appreciate the work that you're doing. And, this really came to the forefront for me and for our office after the 2013 tornadoes. Certainly, May 31st especially had tragic loss of life with non-English speaking residents who misunderstood warnings and misunderstood safety directions and things like that. And Kim was part of that service assessment. But our local Oklahoma City Telemundo station finally hired their first meteorologist right after that. And that station covers the entire state. I can't even imagine their one-person shop covering all that weather. Because of that, they have a hard time keeping people there. I mean, it's basically been a revolving door. About the time we get a relationship with the TV meteorologist that's there, then they're gone to something else. But is that something? Do you know much about the TV broadcasting as far as the Spanish-speaking stations go? I mean, is that a problem other stations have, or? I guess James would call this a medium-sized market, and we're fortunate to have that station. We also have at least one radio station where people can get weather information. But is that a problem that you've heard of, Joseph, anywhere else?
Oh, yes, 100%. Especially nowadays, the needs for bilingual meteorologists are ever so increasing, but there's not that many going into the field altogether. Really, a lot of bilingual broadcast meteorologists come from the news area, and then they'll do a certificate in meteorology and then pursue their studies that way. You don't have that many people, go from English to Spanish, because there's just a lot of things that we have yet to address. And, the CDM exam was a very good first in institutionalizing this and making sure that, there is a certification for this. I think we need to think a little bit more deeper than that, though. In our universities and programs, we have class credits for broadcast meteorologists. There's resources for them to use. Put yourself in the shoes of a bilingual meteorologist trying to go on television. A lot of the times they don't even have a dictionary or any sort of glossaries at hand to go about doing this. And so when you think about it, it's slightly easier to go into English right now, considering that your whole entire degree already is in that language. The textbook is always openly available to you. And so, the lack of resources too contributes to this notion that there's just a lack of bilingual broadcast meteorologists on television. Also, things regarding pay equity. There's a lot of times where the Spanish language stations aren't paid as much as the English language stations, and somebody being bilingual and knowing both languages will probably choose the English language station instead. Also, since there are smaller teams, you often have a lot more responsibility at hand. And I'm sure, like in a place like Oklahoma, with it being so active weather all around, a one-person weather team could be very, very overwhelming very quickly. And so, there's a lot of tough challenges ahead in addressing this. But I think, we address it at the root, and really looking at how we can make sure that these resources are given throughout the university program, that there are classes or certificates available so that people can take advantage of. Because even in my own perspective, as trying to be a bilingual broadcast meteorologist throughout my undergrad at Texas A&M, like Locally, there wasn't any Spanish language news station. I had to drive up to Dallas during the summer or go somewhere else to be able to have that sort of experience. And, a lot of times places like even, for example, in College Station, like, part of being a broadcast meteorologist is having a mentor that can really help guide you in your reels and everything. And so with the lack of resources altogether, it is an uphill battle. And I really do think looking on to the future, we look forward to addressing that with our AMS committee and really trying to find practical solutions, because I agree, Rick. I do feel like there needs to be a dedicated meteorologist that really understands the community, because that's how communication can be more effective at the end of the day.
Joseph, this is Bill Murray. It's great to have you on the show again. And we got a news story today here in Alabama that the poverty levels among our Spanish immigrant population are higher than the national average. So that's another complicating factor. Have you given much thought to that part of it, and how we can, mitigate that disparity and that inequity also?
Yeah, I think really in our research, the big sort of point we always want to get across is that, yes, these communities are vulnerable and disproportionately affected by disaster. And the way we go about doing that is not seeing them as a monolith. We always just think that Hispanic or Latinos are just one big group, or that if you speak Spanish, you all fall under this category. But as we're learning more and more in research, it's not that simple. People have different backgrounds. They come from different places in Latin America, different governments, different political ideologies, different cultures and backgrounds. And all of that influences how you perceive risk and ultimately make decisions. And so, yes, to your question, I definitely agree. It's looking just beyond the language barrier and really trying to dig in a little bit deeper. And that's something, super excited to work with Kim here as a grant as a co-PI to really these next 3 years do annual surveys on Spanish speaking communities, and not just, have the premise be, do you speak Spanish, but start breaking it down by other groups too, based on income, based on overall socioeconomic status, origin countries and everything, to get a baseline understanding. Because done a lot of work in severe weather, but think about winter weather, with not that many winter weather hazards, something recently was the word snow squall. It's been a little tough to translate into Spanish. And so there's just a whole lot of things ahead, and we're just looking forward to addressing them throughout the time.
Joseph, the thing that got me as an English speaker, as head of the CBM exam review committee, came from you and other folks. And it hit me upside the head. I had no idea when we started looking at this, is something you pointed out a bit earlier, that not all the meteorological terms that we use mean the same thing in different Spanish dialects. And I'm sitting here when I first heard this, and I said, how are we ever going to be able to do this exam? But you taught me, and our group taught me that I had to appreciate that. And that's why we so carefully went through that. But that was a learning moment for me, Joseph, that I had no idea. And I don't think most people understand that.
And, can you imagine us having difficulties as professionals? Like you put that to the community, and it's a completely different story. At least we're lucky enough to have that meteorological knowledge and background, but you try to tell that to somebody in the public, and yeah, of course, there is going to be confusion. And I do think we need to break those barriers in the future, but I think it's going to take a coordination of both physical and social scientists to come together and really try to get a better understanding of all this. Because when it comes to different sorts of hazards that really don't happen in Latin America and they don't have a word to describe it, well, how do you encourage someone to take action? You're going back to the fundamental premise of just even defining what the hazard is.
James, you have a great story tied to that, right?
Yeah, Joseph and I was at NBC5 in Dallas Fort Worth. We shared studio with Telemundo, and Ariel Cohen was the meteorologist there. He was from Cuba. And what drove him crazy back and forth was the translation between Mexican Spanish, which was the predominant Hispanic dialect, I guess would be the word for it, of Spanish in DFW or Latin American, and then Cuban Spanish, which was much more widely spoken where Ariel grew up in South Florida. And even to the point of, what do you call a warning? And so it was, it drove him crazy. Now, that said, me putting a little piece of tape on his optical mouse every so often drove him crazy too. So you know.
That's so hilarious. Yeah, no, there's a lot of fun examples. Like, for example, the word rip current in Spanish is resaca, which, yeah, it is, technically and scientifically correct. But resaca in Spanish also means hangover.
Oh, wow.
So we'll literally have, these rip current warnings coming out. And so, they'll announce it like, hey, yo, like hangover warning when you go out to the beach. I mean, I guess, sure, right?
In there,
like,
yeah.
But no, there's a ton of examples where that fits in, and where we really need to be a little bit more considerate, about the different backgrounds and different dialects and everything. And you know what? I know this can seem overwhelming, especially not knowing Spanish. Like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Like, how do we even solve this? Well, good thing is that, really, we're not the first ones to undergo this. A lot of my own research is inspired by bilingual health communication research, because they face much of the very similar problems that we do. They have to translate super confusing and sometimes like very complicated jargon into simple, plain language to encourage people to take medical action. And so there's been a lot of research already done in bilingual health communication. They've already found some strategies. And so what they do is they split it in half. When it comes to scientific terminology that people don't practice on an everyday basis, it's okay for the professionals to come together and decide on a word and just embark on an educational campaign. But when we're talking the risk words like warning or watch or all those sort of other words, like, of course, weather's not the only place they see these words in. You literally look at the back of a bleach bottle and says, warning, please don't drink it. And so like, because of that, that's where you need to be a little more conscientious of like where, the dialects and how all of that plays in. And so, there is a framework and a strategy already developed. It's just a matter of bringing everyone together and really having these conversations about how we go forward. And just one last thing, since you did bring up watch, warning, and advisory, we just published a piece in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society where we tested it. We tested the 3 words with a nationwide sample of Spanish speakers and gave them all the translations of these different words and asked them to rank it how urgent that these words communicated to them. And ironically enough, advisory was more urgent than watch and warning in Spanish. Just a piece of thought there.
So let's press into that example a little bit more, because you did some work in that area, and you're sort of showcasing that translation isn't just about, this is something Rick put in chat and I really loved it. It's not just about putting something in Google Translate, spitting it out, and then there you go, it's translated, done. Like, what's the difficulty? What you're getting at is that the words themselves can have different underlying meanings in the different cultural contexts that people are bringing to our country. So you can think about it as people are born in a particular culture and context with language that is adapted to that context, and they bring it here where it's not adapted the same way. And they're trying to fit, like in some ways, a square peg into a round hole. And our job as risk communicators is to meet them where they are and to say, okay, you're a square peg, I'm going to make you a square hole. And you've done this. You talked about your BAMS article. Could you talk a little bit more too about, you did some work looking at SPC categories, and this is already a gnarly topic in English. What did that look like in Spanish?
Yeah, no, that was that's what really brought this concept of, we're not translating the word, but rather the meaning of the message. And I'll say that again, just because it's so important. We're translating the meaning, but not the word. And we really got to contextualize that through the SPC risk category research, because at least the previous translations weren't translating the meaning. They were rather translating the word. And, that really goes back to even policies altogether of what is a translation. Like, I want to dig that deep, we can. But, working with linguistic experts from Penn State University, we tried to figure out all the different variations of what connotations are these words actually trying to communicate. And, we found that in the previous translations, there was terminology that was pretty much only practiced in Spain, and and people from Latin America wouldn't understand. One of the examples was the word leve, which is supposed to be a synonym for low risk, but yeah, only people in Spain really use that word in their language, and not that many people in Latin America do. And so we developed and proposed a new risk category that was a lot more universal, that, depending on where you're from or how you're raised, there are words that do communicate that risk more uniformly. And so translating it from Spanish to English, it is mínimo or minimum, bajo, low, moderate, or moderado. Sorry, my bilingual brain is getting woozy here. Alto or high, and extremo. Oh, sorry, alto. Oh my God, yeah. There we go. My brain is just like, what? But it's mínimo, bajo, moderado, alto, and extremo, which translates to minimum, low, moderate, high, and extreme. So a much more simple way of doing it in Spanish. And, one of the first comments we got was like, wait, can that work in English too? And of course, we'll be using social science data to truly evaluate that in the future and see if that's also something that we can apply to. But, this was recently operationalized just this last spring. And so now all of our partners on television are using those words in a much more uniform manner. And a lot of them are like, yeah, this makes more sense. Like the confusion has decreased. And it was a victory and a success story to go back to that we're not translating the word, but the meaning of the message. They're two different things.
I just have to say, as a geographer, I love this problem because it centers really on place, and that, where you are on the planet has so much to do with the way your culture evolves and how you adapt, and that language even becomes involved with that is just fantastic. And there's so many layers of things that we can explore as meteorologists, working to try to serve our publics better. And this is such a great layer. I'll pass this at this point to Jen. I know she had a comment.
I do. Joseph, it's so nice to meet you. This is so fascinating to learn. And I wanted to just kind of bring up, I'm not even sure how to ask the question. It's kind of just a topic, but we talk about how we want folks to be more weather ambassadors in their community. And how could we maybe try to explore that more with all the different cultural communities that are in the US? And I wanted to bring up something that when we were writing our Hackleberg series, we interviewed a family, it was the Guzman family, and they lost their daughter. And it was very important to them after we interviewed them that they wanted to share a message on our website, and we recorded it, and they wanted to do it in Spanish. And the message is in Spanish and directed towards Spanish-speaking communities in the US who may not be able to speak English and might be unaware of just how serious tornadoes can be. And so I don't speak Spanish. And so we had someone in our server translate this for us. And I want to read it. It was just, to me, it was important. For all the Hispanic community, my name is Noelle Guzman. My wife's name is Carolina Guzman. We live in northern Alabama in a town called Moulton, Alabama. We lost our 12-year-old daughter from a tornado. Please, we beg of you that if there's a tornado warning message, please take this very seriously. Don't let what happened to me happen to you. Take care of your children, protect them, and take of yourselves as well. When there's a danger of tornadoes, please find close shelter and save your children. Don't do it for you, do it for them. And it was just really heartfelt. And I see Mr. Guzman and his wife and their family as ambassadors. They took what happened and they wanted to speak and say something for people to understand what happened to them. And so I just want to get your thoughts on that, Joseph. It was just very heartfelt for us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing their stories and for elevating them. I think that, yeah, these people in these communities, these community leaders that at least have these sorts of connections, they're very critical in this Weather Ready Nation Ambassador program, and really just connecting with them as a whole. Just because, as I mentioned before, even in our field work, they weren't looking to a meteorologist to get information. They weren't looking on social media and trying to find a scientist out there. They were looking at their, at their pastor, at somebody in the school district, as somebody in a community center that they already were trusting and were getting involved. And we talked to a lot of community leaders, even in our field work, and they were just like, oh no, yeah, I want to learn more about this, because people ask me all the time, even in Mayfield, there was one person sending a text message to 50 different people all at once, because they were the ones translating it into Spanish for that given community. And so, yeah, no, they want to get more involved. A lot of them just don't know how. And I really do think this is where we can bridge a lot of things together. And I also want to highlight the quote that you just said. It has a lot of substance, and really the community expertise can go a long way, because even when you read that message, they were talking about an experience that they had, but then they had a collective tone to it. We need to take care of each other, please don't let this happen to me. Let it happen to you. This goes back to even just it I guess illustrates our culture altogether. Latino culture is very collective. We're a unit, we're a whole. And that's honestly, at least in bilingual risk communication studies, one of the most effective way to engage people. And they didn't have to open any sort of textbook to do that because they were part of the community. And that's why I'm a fond believer of community expertise, because goodness gracious, even reading that message, that was a powerful, impactful thing that could really engage a lot of people. And I think by uplifting those stories, we can definitely get a lot more awareness out there. But yeah, no, it's just super important at the end of the day. And I do see a great value in incorporating them even before the storm strikes.
That was such a wonderful message, and thank you for sharing it. And I think, the field work that you did, we've sort of touched on it a little bit. Let's go ahead and take a deep dive now and just move straight into that topic. Immigrant populations and people who, for whom English isn't their first language, including Spanish speakers, but not solely Spanish speakers, something that I think you'll come to. They were a big part of the story in this event. Just remind us about some of the immigrant populations that were impacted. What kinds of circumstances were they in that left them more vulnerable?
Of course. Yeah, no, these people a lot of them recently immigrated to the United States. So a lot of them did not have that sort of experience of even having severe weather altogether. And coming from different places in Latin America, some even admitted that they've never really, the first siren they've ever heard was literally that moment. And I think that quote itself could really help paint that picture, that a lot of these communities would have loved to have been prepared, but just didn't have those resources coming in. And it's not just that, but when we went into this field work, we were really trying to understand, the needs and the perspectives of Spanish speakers. And we come to find that there was just a whole other communities out there. I'm actually going to pull up a quote here that we got from Bowling Green, Kentucky, from one of their community leaders. And it goes that between all of the victims that were affected by the tornado in Bowling Green, the victims themselves spoke 10 different languages. And this is, it's just solely the victims. And so they say Spanish, Swahili, Bosnian, Korean, Karenni, Zomi. And yeah, those were the top languages. We included Pashto and Dari because there were some Afghans and there were some Somalis. And so they were just talking about 9 or 10 different languages that just affected the victims. And how do you get all of this information out to them before, during, and after the disaster? Not even that, but even places in Mayfield, people come from indigenous backgrounds, and a lot of them don't even speak Spanish. What I learned and was really, really interested in Mayfield was that in the Mayfield School District, there's a very high Guatemalan population there. And so a lot of them come from from parts of Guatemala where they only exclusively speak a language called Quiche, which is an indigenous language that they revere a lot. And nearly 1 million people in Guatemala practice it. And so what happens in Mayfield is that the kids go to school, they first learn Spanish so that they can get, used to their own community and be able to communicate with them. And then they eventually learn English so that they can be trilingual by the time they graduate. And so during the Mayfield event, we had an instance of where the warning would come out in English, then it would get translated to Spanish, and then the children would translate it from Spanish to Quiche. And I was just sitting there just shocked, like, wow, how does that even work? And, you don't even have much time altogether. And we're playing a game of warning telephone here down a community. And it just goes to contextualize all of this. And, another thing too is immigration status. And before I even dig into this, I want to just start with the National Weather Service mission statement to protect life and property. I'm a fond believer that we have to protect all life and property, regardless of background or origin. And that established, there were undocumented immigrants in the event that they would have much rather, and I have a quote here, that they would much rather stay at home and withstand a tornado, even if they knew it was a dangerous situation or in a mobile home, because they would much rather withstand a tornado than possibly go to a shelter where they would be asked for a social security number and be separated from their family members. Let it sink in. It's something that happened. It's something that's realistic. It hurts to hear because, we want people to take action, but it's just one of the many vulnerabilities that were experienced by real life people during this event. There was even a case where someone didn't go to the hospital, even though they were visibly hurt. because they were too scared of the implications of their immigration status. And I think it paints the broader picture and really where our field is headed, that we're advancing so much in risk communication, but we need to really address those deep vulnerabilities that often aren't talked about, because that's truly what's hindering people from taking action.
Joseph,
Sorry,
and
go ahead.
yeah. A question for both of you in reference to the field work. The thing that kind of caught me by surprise and even now kind of shake my head over was the factory in Mayfield. And also, if you recall, I think it's the same day up in Illinois, that's the Amazon factory as well. And I sit there and go, don't employers have some responsibility of telling employees what to do in these kind of situations? And I don't give it, whether it's English or Spanish or whatever it is, I think they owe that responsibility to, if you have people working for you, you've got to make sure they understand it. And clearly, from what I understand, and you can tell me, Joseph or Kim, with your field work, it didn't work those days in that factory in Mayfield. At the Amazon factory, I think I just think they told them, hey, don't worry about it. And I don't know how many lawsuits come out of that, but we were dealing with that. Even corporate wouldn't tell people what to do, or even in some cases, maybe in the cases of the Amazon, allow them to take precautions. Am I far off there?
No, not at all. It was something that was brought up repeatedly throughout a lot of the interviews that we had with communities. In Spanish, that factory was infamous, or they know it as Las Velas, or the candles. And so we'd always hear about Las Velas throughout the entire sort of interviews that we would have. And though we didn't interview anybody that was directly affected, we did learn a lot of insight into just how that response, just the aftermath of the whole event, also made trust go down in these communities, that, oh, these people aren't going to be here for me in the future. So we cannot rely, on these sorts of leaders within our community and things like that. I know it's just something unfortunate, but it's realistic that, anything that happens in the aftermath, people are paying attention. Those will be nuggets of knowledge they take into the next, hopefully never, but the next disaster that they undergo. And it's not just the local community. The word gets around that these sorts of scenarios happen, these vulnerabilities happen, and it lessens the trust in what it's supposed to be the most trusted source, and those are the officials themselves. And so while we didn't interview anybody directly from those candle factories, you could already saw various narratives where they were just referencing that and just questioning, we as workers do deserve some rights, but we don't know if we have that complete picture quite yet. And many did want to leave. Again, we didn't interview anybody directly, but I read up, through the New York Times and different news and media outlets that there was people that wanted to leave, but didn't, were forced to stay, that, oh, this wasn't going to be anything huge. And, there wasn't any personal accounts because I'm sure they didn't want to elevate and put their status in play. But, when you consider the immigrant status too, you're relying on this work. And if you get fired, that you lose your, you may lose your visa, you may be separated from your family. So it's a multi-layered problem you have to really think about at the end of the day, and how all of these things, all the intersectionality comes into play during a disaster.
Yeah, the issue of one of the things that's raised for our team was that response. We so often assume that individuals have complete agency over themselves. And by that, I mean, they get to look at what the risk is and then make a choice for themselves. And then, they can execute their own decision. But so often the decisions are actually made in a collective. So in a family group, so there's like a social dynamic at play, or they're made, if you are making a decision during the school day, a lot of students, hundreds of students might be relying on an individual or two to make decisions for them. During the workday, again, you're relying on people like your supervisor to make those decisions for often a lot of people. And so, we're kind of outside the bounds of just individual cognition here and communicating to individuals. We are really in this space of these need to be organizational processes that work. And that's a tough thing, and it has a lot of different kinds of implications. Businesses have very different kinds of incentives for sheltering or not than individuals often do. We think about people having like leisure time or free time to do this, and that's not necessarily the case. And that's that was something that was at play on the Mayfield Day, because this was prior to Christmas. We did have one interview. It was interesting. It wasn't in any of the Spanish language interviews, but Joseph, I don't know if we even discussed this at length in the English side. We had one interview with an individual who'd been in the candle factory, and she was primarily Spanish language speaking, but I interviewed her because she was just at a site that I was doing interviews, and she shared this whole process that went on where people were trying to ask to leave and they were denied that ability. And part of it was because there'd already been a storm earlier and that had passed, near Mayfield and hadn't hit it. And the supervisor was caught in this, well, we've got this complexity of Christmas is coming. This is our big time of year. We need to get all this stuff out and, letting you guys leave. Cause that was essentially the ask was, can we just leave? Like, well, we had a whole evening shift and night shift planned. And it was an extremely disruptive decision. Not to say that excuses it, but that is what is at play with organizational decision-making versus individual decision-making. And the immigrant populations, so many immigrant populations, different languages, cultures were all intersecting in that factory. Very few people felt they had the agency to leave. Very few felt they had the capacity to leave. And that was something that was reported to us, in at least that one interview. So I think it is an important layer to consider that decision-making in these events isn't often up to individuals. Joseph, I'm curious, looking at this event and taking a step back, did you feel that the immigrant populations that you interviewed were ready for this event? Did they have awareness before the day of that things could even be bad, or were they largely sort of responding on the spot day of?
Yeah, no, again, I want to definitely highlight that there was no Spanish language or any other languages other than English information. And so a lot of them did not even know that it was happening. Even the community leaders that are often bilingual know English and are more familiar with their given environments. Most when we kind of, at least from our small sample of 25, the community leaders didn't find out till the night before, and the majority of immigrants didn't find out until their phone started vibrating and the sirens started ringing. And that's just, it's a completely different story with many other populations in that given area. A lot of them were just thinking it was going to be, just another thunderstorm day. A lot of them acknowledge that they don't have, since there is no Spanish language coverage in that area, all they have is just their weather app on their phone, where they can just, and it said thunderstorms tomorrow. And that's kind of the premise that a lot of people were thinking that day was going to become. A lot of them, a lot of immigrant Spanish speaking populations that we interviewed, were just going on about their day. One was actually at a family party, and the skies were getting dark, and they're like, it's probably just another small little storm. We'll be fine. And a person drives back home, and if you would have driven back home even 15 minutes after, it would have been a completely different story. Something that I noticed a lot in the data was just the power of having those informal networks. A lot of the children, which culturally, this is crazy to me, that a lot of the children were making decisions on behalf of the entire family, just because that, you, at least in Latino culture, that's definitely the other way around. You never tell your parents what to do. But, in this case, that was what people relied on. And here's a quote for you from a Mexican immigrant in Mayfield, where they were just saying, my daughter received an alert while looking at her cell phone, and she said to her mother, "The tornado is going to happen. What should we do?" My wife said, "Oh, no, it's not going to happen. I think it's just strong winds." But my daughter was the one that urged them to seek shelter. And this family was on the second floor, went down to the first floor in a basement, and their whole house was gone in just a couple of minutes. It just goes to show that power of informal networks. And really, a lot of the children that were in school were the ones that were, getting a better sense. And, which is why I admire a lot of James Spann's work too. And, going into these communities and going into schools and teaching the children, because they're a very, very valuable perspective here, especially for more underserved groups. But yeah, no, overall, these people, a lot of them, the majority of them had no idea this was happening, despite, it being on headlines. But if these headlines aren't in a language you're going to understand, you're not going to grasp it, and you're not going to take considerable action as a result.
Well, I think what's interesting, Joseph, is this was a December event. I mean, it was one of those things you don't expect. And I don't, Kim, I apologize, but I'll pull us out live. As James likes to say, it's 7:58 on Monday evening, the 12th day of December, 2022. And as we speak, the first tornado warning has just come out from the Northeast Texas Panhandle near Perryton, Texas. And you say, well, yeah, okay, let's look at the atmosphere. The current temperature in Perryton is 52. It's over a dew point of 49. And you've got to wonder if we're maybe dealing with the same thing up there tonight. People saying it's 52 degrees, Kim, and there can't be a tornado. Well, Amarillo has just issued the first tornado warning. It came after a severe thunderstorm warning. And by the way, it came about a half hour or 45 minutes after the first mesoscale discussion from the SPC in Norman that came out. So, I just here we are. I mean, these non-typical events, and it's like James says from Tulsa, it doesn't feel like tornado, and that being a somewhat common response,
Yep,
Yeah,
an
no.
interesting note that it doesn't feel like tornado. And that's if you know what tornado feels like.
Yeah.
And that might have been where you were going to go, Joseph.
Yep, that right there. Like, do you even know what the phenomenon of a tornado truly is? Maybe you've seen it on television, maybe you've heard about it, and that, hey, it might happen around here. But to somebody that doesn't have that generational knowledge and that culture of really understanding where that tornado is, I don't blame a lot of people to just being like, oh, it might not happen, or it's not going to happen to me, sort of thing, because we're already at a disadvantage of just the fact that, like, just the concept of a tornado isn't as familiar to them than compared to anybody else, really. And so yeah.
And Kim, I wanted to circle back to the labor and management issue, because it's an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. We had hotels in the path that night and had been talking about it for days. And our biggest concern that night was keeping people from leaving and going into danger, because people did want to leave, and we would have allowed them to leave if they weren't driving right into the path of the tornado. And to me, it's whether you want to be a tragedy or a miracle. And I'm taken back to the 2004 tornado in Illinois that hit the Parsons manufacturing plant. And that owner had planned from the get-go to protect his employees in case there ever was a tornado, going as far as posting sentries, to look to the southwest, even going above and beyond just, the normal monitoring, the local weather conditions. And those employees were ushered into shelters, and all of them were unscathed at the end of the event because he had provided for them. And I think that's the inspiring message that we all need to take. And Joseph, you mentioned, our ambassadors, looking for ways to, use their weather, superpowers, even if they consider them to be pretty small. But you mentioned the children there. We had Trent Okerson on last week, and he and Noah talked about, Trent actually spoke in the school in Mayfield the day before the tornado, just by happenstance. And what happens to those children who are not, their English is a, second language situation? And James Spann can comment on this. How do you communicate to them? Do they get the message in those school talks the same as the English speaking kids?
Yeah, a lot of the time, the people in bilingual classes, like, yes, like they do it in both languages, but they'll try, especially like, of course, probably the younger kids probably won't be able to grasp a ton of that information. But, even I remember when I first got here to the US, I was a little sponge. Like I learned English in like 4 or 5 months. It was crazy because you just hear it so much. And like, it's just a prime time to learn a lot of things that, yeah, even some people that we interviewed, like, for example, like, one of them, for example, tried to do they told me this, like, I want to practice my English. Can we do this interview in English? I'm like, I got you. And, even though their English wasn't like perfect, it was just enough to be able to understand that information and pass it down to other family members. So I do think there is value in that sort of local connections and really establishing those connections with school districts and everything of that sort, because that's where all the learning happens. And they go back home and tell their family, look what I learned today. I learned about tornadoes. I learned about what things to do as a result of them. And as we could very tell, like these children that pretty much did not really have much experience altogether heard something like this before, and they wanted to make sure that message was communicated to their family. And I just think that that's just so important. Like, here, and a lot of people would even ask their children to verify information and this gets to the theme of misinformation too, because a lot of that happens right before a disaster, just because everyone's nervous about it. And here's a quote for you from a Mexican immigrant in Mayfield. We started receiving alerts from our phones and our priest, so I asked my son, what is going on? He said, let me look for more information. And he was checking the news, obviously in English, and said, Mom, a tornado is coming. We have to find sturdy shelter. He started showing me different sources. Look at this, look at that. And, I just think that's beautiful. In our risk communication literature, we call it milling, informally and formally looking for information sources and verifying them. And so they also played a central role in that to kind of dissuade a lot of the doubts of what was going on and letting them know, no, look, I'm looking at all the sources now. Like, this is real, this is happening, and we need to take action.
I know James ate a lot. You had an interesting note in chat. I don't know if you want to put that in.
Troy had brought it up. We're talking about doesn't feel like tornado weather, and this heuristic people process through how bad is this going to be several hours in advance. And one question that I get a lot, which is actually a fairly advanced question, but I'm in Oklahoma and people, as you said, are familiar with this kind of severe weather a lot, is, are these storms going to be individuals, meaning supercells, or are they going to be in a line? Because they've got this perception that linear storms aren't going to put down damaging tornadoes. But it's actually a fairly advanced question, as kind of frustrating as it can be, because yeah, you can get tornadoes from all modes of storms, but it's a pretty advanced level of knowledge.
Yeah. And, even some of the terminology itself, I know that in English, especially in areas that are affected by tornadoes a lot, we kind of assume that people are already very knowledgeable of these phenomenon and things like that. But here's another quote from Arkansas, and a Venezuelan immigrant says, I do understand English when I listen to the radio, but there are certain terms that I don't understand because they are meteorological terms. It's all weird. So like, well, I guess this means the tornado is dangerous. I have to guess whether they're telling me to take action or not. And, huge shout out to Ryan Vaughn, by the way. He read up on this study and now has Spanish language information in his news station, and where he brings in a local or, someone in the newsroom that speaks Spanish. He puts the forecast out in English, and just in a Facebook Live or even on social media, they start sharing that in Spanish to kind of break down those barriers. But yeah, no, it even goes to question, like, an area like Oklahoma, I know, like, we're more likely to use correlation coefficient on air, but for a lot of communities that might not be familiar with that, that might be extremely confusing and very off-putting from the very get-go.
Hey, Joseph, I want to go back to a term you threw out there a minute ago, and we're familiar with it, called milling, where you're trying to seek additional information. That has to be a whole different concept with the Spanish-speaking community. I mean, with us, you can flip through 4 or 5 different TV stations and look on the computer, and you've got all these information sources. Milling, there's not very many sources to mill from, right? But it's the same kind of thing going on. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. Yeah, like milling is still happening regardless, in both English and Spanish speaking communities. But this is where you can see the vulnerability truly start to play into effect. Because while, English speakers have 4 or 5 different channels they can flip through, they can log into social media and, look up a hashtag and kind of see the more thorough weather analysis. Spanish speakers are only limited to their own social networks, to their own community leaders that most of the time do not have expertise in this area and may give a recommendation that isn't as effective. And so that's, they're still milling, but there's not that many quote unquote official sources to mill from. So that's why a lot of the actions that they start making aren't as effective. There was actually one, and I wish I would have included this in the manuscript we submitted, but there was this one conversation I had with somebody that like they don't believe in their weather or really any local officials or anything. They just believe their next door neighbor that somehow predicted the tornado that happened in Arkansas the year before. And they're just like, if they know it's serious, then I'm going to take shelter kind of thing. And, and when you think about it, probably not the most effective way to kind of get a sense of the situation, but it's very real and it's very pertinent. And I think it's good to acknowledge that, milling is way more informal for multilingual communities than it is for English speaking communities.
But in a way, and it is possible that you're going to get bad information if you're using just primarily those social networks. But in a way, people trust those social networks more than other sources in a lot of cases. So they may not need as many sources to get information to confirm or to get them to do something. But they may be getting bad information unintentionally, but you see what I'm saying? Like you don't need 7 sources of information. If the 2 that you've got are ones that you really trust, it's your dad or it's a priest or something that you trust. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Rick, you just wrote my next research project here. That's so fascinating. You're right. If you trust more people, you might not have to depend on many sources. So that's actually something that I even haven't thought about, but would be very fascinating to explore and really dig into. Because a lot of them don't have one disposal to many information sources. And that trust is deep in that community. You do trust them really with your entire life. Just growing up, there's people that I know that like I trust them with everything they say. And it's just like, it's just so fascinating to really dig into those milling strategies that happen and how, how does misinformation play a role and how can we like come together? And at the end of the day, I love the point that you just made that these people, these community leaders are just as important in this weather communication ecosystem. They are super important to incorporate because, a lot of the time, like it's super hard to get access to these communities. But what we've learned through our studies is that there's key community leaders that if you just get the information to them, they'll take care of their community and the word will get around. And I just think now it's just a matter of bringing in those ambassadors into the Weather Ready Nation program and making sure they're part of the system. Because it's not as intimidating as it sounds. If you find those community leaders, I really do think it can be a lot more effective in engaging a lot more communities in a quicker manner, at least locally, of course.
So Joseph, do you find when you're investigating milling like that, does Google Translate help or is it woefully inadequate?
No, there's definitely a whole lot of layers to it. Yeah, because even the word hail, like it's weird with hail in general, just because like I guess frozen quote unquote precipitation is really weird to translate in Spanish. There's places in Latin America where even like hail gets confused with like sleet because there's not, when you really think about it, it's already very weird in English. It's very much harder to explain in Spanish. So it's mistranslation, cultural backgrounds, all of it comes into play in milling. And I think we have to take that into consideration. But back to Rick, if this research paper comes out, you're getting added to the acknowledgement section for that. That's a good idea.
And Kim, I don't know if James A. got to ask the question or make the point. I've been enjoying being over in the YouTube chat with the Brainiacs over there. And they're a lot of fun. But Nate on the radio had a question from a friend who brought up exactly what James A. was talking about earlier. Do the multilingual stations get the same ratings as the English stations? And is that the problem?
Actually, there's areas in the US where the Spanish language stations outperform the English language stations in terms of viewability and ratings and the things that people look for, but they get paid less. Just something to
Right.
think about.
The money's the factor there. Yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
Yep. So yeah, in DFW where I'm from, like there's times where the Spanish language station will get more viewers than the English language station, just because at least even through national surveys, we found that Spanish speaking communities are a lot more reliant on these television networks because really there's a lot of good research in this in the political communication world, just because these people in the media that do speak their language that's really their entryway to the society. A lot of these people don't really trust things outside of their own social networks. So they confide a lot more in these in media personnel that speak their language because they give them a glimpse as to what's happening around their community. And there was recently, actually, I just came back from the National Communication Association conference where they did a study on Oklahoma, the Telemundo station, and what kind of coverage gets put on in Telemundo versus the English language stations, how much representation factors in each one of them. And yeah, no, truly, it's a gateway to their entire society. And I feel like that's why it explains why there's a lot of more viewership that happens, just because they're more trusted. And it really is a key to a lot more things in perspective. But yeah, no, the fact that there's areas in the US where Spanish does outperform English and news stations is something you have to take into consideration. And also hopefully part of the pay equity issue when we try to raise it later on in the future.
Yeah, no, radio big time is Houston, Dallas. I presume a lot of the major markets like that, this primary Spanish language radio stations just totally outperform the English language stations.
Yeah, no, totally. And, it's actually something that even in the political world, people are taking a lot more notice in, that to reach the local, for example, in Florida, a lot of political campaigns entrust radio stations to get their message out because they know that's where the community is listening to. And, there's now increase more information in radio platforms, especially in the multilingual context. And so, yeah, no, this is such a good conversation because it really opens it up to other sorts of sources, like even Twitter. I know that's something that a lot of the weather Twitter community loves and uses, but a lot of bilingual meteorologists don't often use Twitter to communicate information in Spanish because they know the Spanish speakers aren't there. And something they mainly are just housed in Facebook, where a lot of Spanish speaking communities do exist. And something that I keep trying to poke my friends in the broadcast world is using other social media platforms, especially in the bilingual networks, that appeal to Spanish speakers. Like, for example, WhatsApp is something that is very heavily used in the Spanish speaking community. A lot of people use it to communicate with their family internationally, since it does it for free. And so Univision, for example, not with weather, but they've been doing it with news notifications. You can text a number. And so the WhatsApp, it sends every couple of headlines every couple of days. And I've been trying to poke my broadcast meteorology friends of hey, can you put that in a forecast, the sort of setting, maybe in a more serious situation, warnings and outlooks or something like that, because that's direct access to the community. And a lot of people do sign up for that kind of stuff. But all in all, we really have to reimagine, of course, that, we're just talking Spanish here. There's a ton of multilingual communities in the US that have different preferences for information. And I think it's just valuable to highlight that too.
Speaking of trust and access, I think I want to dig a little bit into the social science method and what was so remarkable about what you were able to accomplish and why it was so important to cover your trajectory into our field. I in listening to you as we went along from town to town through the Mid-South and just the way that you were able to approach people, I want to hear your comment on what it is about the method that makes inclusion and diversity so important for us to consider in our field, and especially on the social science. What did that, being a representative in some way, in some aspects of at least some of these communities, what did that enable you to do as a scientist that would have been really difficult, if not impossible, as someone like me, a native English speaker?
No, 100%. I love that you had asked this question, Kim, because that's something that, in my career, I want to really hone in on, and it's the ethics of research. And really, how do you conduct a research with a more vulnerable group and not exploit them? It can be very, very easy to do that in a research context, and we have to really be careful with it. Personally, I had several experiences throughout the field work where even just the fact that I'm Peruvian and come from that community played a huge role. I remember actually interviewing somebody in Mayfield that looked very intimidated to even talk to me, just because I acknowledged, yeah, we come from the University of Oklahoma. To others, it may be like, oh my gosh, I want to be there for the football team and this and that. But to these people, they're just like, this is an institution. They might exploit me. They might put my information out there. And of course, us being affiliated with a federal agency made those fears a lot worse. Like, why should we trust you guys? I mean, when you really think about it, even FEMA is in the same department that ICE is in. And so a lot of the times people will have trouble trusting you. There was one instance where I was interviewing this individual, and they were just so nervous to talk to me. And we're talking in Spanish. It made them feel a little bit better, but then they were just like, I don't know if I can tell you any of this. Like, what are you going to do with this data? Like, are you going to report me to the authorities? What are you going to do? Well, I will heavily admit I am an immigrant myself. I'm actually deferred action for childhood arrivals. And so I actually had my little DACA card in my pocket, put it in the middle of the table, and just said, it's okay. I understand you. I come from this community. I will never exploit you in that sort of sense. I'm here to help. I just want to listen to your story so that we can come together and find a solution. That was one of the most genuine conversations I've ever had with a research participant. We were not only able to connect, just the disaster story, but that we were able to personalize it with these shared experiences. We were able to connect further. And when we think scientifically, we never want to go out to the field with a dirty research instrument. We want to polish it as much as we have to. That's the same thing for social scientists, because we, the humans, are the research instruments. And we want to make sure that we're as polished as ever, that we represent the communities we're trying to get interviews from, that we speak the same languages as them too. And I think this opens up the conversation in the social science world of research ethics and how we approach this going forward. Because trust me, like somebody that's like, 6 foot, a 6 foot American coming into an immigrant community isn't going to get the same amount of genuineness and reliability of responses than somebody that represents the community itself. And of course, there's a true balance to everything. We can work in teams and work together and collaboratively to bring this all to life. And I think that's just the beauty of our weather enterprise as a whole. We're always willing to work together. But I do want to emphasize that those perspectives are just so valuable, and just helps paint the picture of why representation truly matters in our field and beyond.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was a really eye-opening moment. There's a lot of sort of ahas going on in the chat, and I think it's worth lingering on. We've had some conversations on this among this panel and with various guests in the past about the importance of diversity and inclusion in our field, and how our field as a whole, tends to be drawn from a very limited set of the population. When we know this from surveys of, for example, the American Meteorological Society, they've started to dig into what are the demographics of our membership and what are the demographics of our seal holders and broadcasters. And, there's just really a very particular worldview that comes into the science when you do that. And, part of the issue is, are you able to communicate effectively? But part of the issue, what I think you're also identifying is, are you doing the science in a way that connects with people? So what you just highlighted is the methodology piece. You were able to collect really good data, because you were able to actually get access to those communities and have that trust. And we in the social sciences, we are part of the data collection instrument. The qualities of ourselves are completely inextricable. And the relationship between us and the respondent is in fact like wholly, that's going to be the data that you get. It's very different from observing the atmosphere. You elicit a very different kind of thing out of a person, depending on who you are and how you relate to them. But I also am interested, going into the field, I think you also were able to ask a different set of questions. Can you comment on that? Like you came in sort of with a different set of things that you had in mind. For example, you kind of were thinking about the ICE angle because of your lived experience. I mean, that's something we weren't thinking about at all. Turns out that was very important. Could you comment a little bit about how not only does it shape your access to gaining data and getting good responses, but you even know what to ask people in the first place about what's important to them?
100%. Even the icebreaker was different for us. Like, before we even would get started in the interview, I would always start off by sharing my own personal experience. Like, I'm from Lima, Peru. The sky suddenly exploded in DFW and I was freaking out, and they would just laugh at me and be like, oh my God, same. Like, what is this? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know either. I don't know what you're talking about. But, like one of the very first questions we asked was just simply like, not even about, the current tornado outbreak, just tell me about your life in Latin America. Like, what kind of hazards did you experience over there? And that's how we would always break the ice with them. And at the same time, we learned very valuable information that these people weren't experiencing the same type of weather hazards and the same type of emergency systems and that. And so that's kind of what really guided us. Like, even coming into this, my team comprised of bilingual speakers and that have expertise in this area, we were all just like, yeah, no, that's a great first question to ask. Let's just talk about the weather in back in your home country. What was it like? What information sources did you rely on? And now let's compare that to here in the US. How different is it? What surprises you? What doesn't? A lot of our questions also resonated with the theme that Jen put out earlier of collectivism, of like, one of my favorite questions to ask was, after reviewing the event, what would be something you recommend to your community? Just because these people are so community centered, we got so many genuine responses from that they were just like, oh, I would tell my community to do all of this and take care of themselves here and there and there. And you'd see that learning happening real time. And of course, the immigrant questions were through lived experiences. Some growing up, some of the difficulties expressed in sheltering and evacuation during hurricanes. Like, there's a rule that 100 miles from the border, they can still check for paperwork, and that gets in the way of evacuation efforts too. And that was just one of the very first things that popped up in our heads. And just as living through these experiences, we wanted to get a better understanding of, because I'll tell you what, Kim, like when I first joined this field and read about vulnerabilities in the risk communication literature, these perspectives weren't ever highlighted. And I would always sit there and be like, we live these every single day, but we just don't have a thorough understanding of it yet, which I think is just so valuable. Bringing in, I can only bring in so much from an immigrant perspective, but I can't imagine, as we start to really bring in more talented scientists from different backgrounds, what sort of insights we'll get from our weather enterprise, and how much we can further our understanding and how to keep people safe from disaster. Because hey, that's the goal at the end of the day, to keep everyone safe. And if we have innovative strategies going forward, then let's get as much as we can.
Rick, I think that tees you up perfectly for the question you want to ask.
Yeah, Joseph, I've heard you talk many times, and always impressed and always inspired and ready to go do something. But then I get to the point, it's like, it's overwhelming. What do we do? I mean, what do we do tomorrow to make this better? Where do we start as National Weather Service meteorologists, as TV meteorologists, to make things better? What do we do from here?
Yeah, no, I can definitely most sympathize. I present all this stuff and then everyone's just like, yeah, now what? And I'm like, I get it. I totally get it. Yeah. It's so difficult, especially with you not knowing the language of how to really expand things out. Something that we talked about in this piece for the field work was, there's a lot of things we can do, of course. One of the things, at least nationwide, that we can do is implement language services. Right now, within the Weather Service, there's translation teams that do things on a voluntary basis. So they're forecasters first, but when they have the time, if any, they'll translate some information into Spanish. It's grassroots, it's not paid, it's not systematized. And I think, I recently met up with some of my friends from Environment Canada, where for them, it's federal law that they have to do everything in English and in French. And they have a language department in Environment Canada where there are certified translators there that not just speak French, but other languages too, and are able to do this more actively. And so I really do think, as an enterprise as a whole, the way we move forward is moving away from grassroots and really, systematizing this into a broader and national scale to make it more easy for people to get access to this sort of information. As I mentioned before, the FCC allowed multilingual wireless emergency alerts now. That's great, but we need the people to translate them. And I very strongly believe that one of the most low-hanging fruit we can address are those WIA messages, because what we found in the field work was that that's what people were most relying on. People that didn't really weren't accustomed to an emergency system here all still had access to their phones, and all those phones vibrated throughout the night. The only difference was that they just didn't understand what was happening. So many of them just shut it off. Like, I don't know what this means. And, I really do think that's, at least for multilingual communities, can be one very simple way, at least in the imminent disaster, of what we can push forward. Of course, there's a lot of things happening in the national scale, but I really do think it goes down to making sure this no longer just becomes a grassroots and volunteer effort, and something that we can institutionalize. And that's why I'm so happy with Troy and others' work to bring that CBM exam completely in Spanish, to finally start making it part of our system and not just something that we have to do additionally, if you know what I mean.
Hey, Joseph, I think one thing TV can do, and this to you, Rick, as well, is what Ryan's doing in Jonesboro. If there aren't Spanish language media outlets, and it's something, I've got a fairly fluent Spanish speaker, a lot better than I can speak in Spanish. And so we're going to work on not only full screens that we can put up on the weather computer behind me. Now, I can read Spanish fine, so it won't be a problem for me to read it. I just can't think English, translate, and do this in real time. But he can. So if he's here, it's, hey, if this is in a city center or an area that has a higher Hispanic population, tell me, do it 30 seconds in Spanish, go, Mike. And then, then he can pitch back to me. And Ryan said he's had very little negative feedback, and that's always a little bit of a concern too. But, I'm not that I look forward to severe weather season, but I think it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, that's something else we highlighted in this manuscript, that, it's not going to solve everything overnight. But in broadcast, folks, for our broadcast friends listening to this, if you do have a bilingual staff in your weather team, they don't even have to be a meteorologist. It's somebody from the editor's desk, and you give them a forecast and they're able to translate it in Spanish. And hey, even if they just read it, and like just reading the paper as they go, like in a Facebook Live, most of the time, those do get a lot of hits, because the community is like, whoa, that's in our language, so we got to share this. And a lot of people are excited to share it, because they're like, oh, I know somebody that speaks Spanish, that they can get a hold of them much quicker. And it's no longer more about, not the community leaders trying to translate every single warning, but now they at least have a glimpse of it. And that's definitely some short, low hanging fruit that we can address in the broadcast meteorology community. And if your news director is a little bit conflicted with it, you can say that those usually do get a lot more hits, just because a lot more people resonate with it. They want to keep their community safe. A lot of people, at the end of the day, and this happens with my work too, anytime I get criticism over it, I always just go back to the Weather Service mission statement: to protect life and property. That's all life and property. And I think that's something that we can hone in, nationwide, that we just need to keep our people safe, and we'll do it in English and Spanish and Portuguese or whatever it takes.
And, I share the same argument that Alabama James will give when people complain, why are you on TV for that little town in Haskell County? Well, because their life's just as important as my next door neighbors. And that pretty much shuts it down.
And my deal, and by the way, this has been a great discussion. I've enjoyed listening to it. When I get interns in the summer here, and these are brilliant college students from many different campuses all over the country, they come in here and they're very surprised the first day, because the deal. You know what I do? I take them to a Walmart in a working class part of the city with an amazing cross section of people that they will be dealing with. Some of the people are older, like me. Some are younger than they are. Some are high income. Some are low income. Some speak Spanish. Some speak English. It is the most diverse crowd you will ever experience in that Walmart. And for those college students, a lot of those people in that Walmart, they don't think like the college students think. They don't have the same education level. They don't vote like they vote in this, nation that's just totally torn apart by politics. And I want to see if you can communicate with these different people groups in that Walmart. And you've got to be able to communicate with all of them. And if you can't, we've got a problem here. And some do well with it, some don't do well with it. But I'll say that we've still got a lot of work to do. And this has been a really good discussion, because quite frankly, where I am, we suck at it. in terms of, excuse the expression, reaching those that speak Spanish. We do not have a Telemundo station on television here. We have a series of Spanish language radio stations, but there's been some work, but not enough. So I've been given some great ideas on this show tonight. So Joseph, thanks for your work and your passion and your energy. I love your energy. I wish I had this guy's energy. I mean, he's good.
Oh my gosh, coming from you, James, that's an honor. So thank you.
No. I mean that. I mean, it's like, yeah, I can read people like a book, and you have a real passion for people. And that's really refreshing. And this whole discussion is just refreshing. And again, it's an eye-opening lesson for me and for a lot of meteorologists, I think. And it's given me some good ideas on how to attack the problem, because we lost a lot of those that speak Spanish April 27th, 2011. We didn't lift a finger to help them, and shame on us. That's ridiculous. We didn't do a good job with low-income families, all these different people groups that are in that Walmart. And here I am, the guy that takes them in there, then I should know better. So again, but what we have to do at the moment is pause very quickly, because we have to go to Tony Rice. And from there, we're going to go to Jen this week in tornado history. We're going to come back with some email. We did not do email last week. We'll do an email segment. We will have picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Early Thursday morning, NASA plans the launch of the Surface Water and Ocean Topography Mission, or SWOT. It's a joint program between NASA and the French Space Agency, along with additional instruments provided by the British and Canadian space agencies, to measure the height of water in Earth's lakes, rivers, reservoirs, and the ocean. SWOT will help us better understand where the water is today, where it's coming from, and where it might be tomorrow. It's also going to provide a better picture of how the ocean helps mitigate climate change by absorbing heat and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This will help better understand ocean warming, sea level rise, and how bodies of water respond to changing precipitation patterns, critical to improving drought as well as flood forecasting. SWOT works with a pair of antennae. They stretch out about as wide as a tennis court, beaming a signal which bounces off the Earth's surface. It's received and analyzed using interferometry to provide a 3D view. This is much higher resolution than previous missions and will provide data on the world's lakes larger than 15 acres and rivers wider than 333 feet. NASA TV launch coverage starts at 3 a.m. Pacific, 6 a.m. Eastern, ahead of a scheduled 3:46 a.m. Pacific launch from the Vandenberg Space Force Base along the central California coast. Launches headed for a nearly polar orbit like this one are visible throughout central and especially Southern California, and may be visible as far east as Nevada and Arizona. You can learn more about the mission at swat.jpl.nasa.gov. Elsewhere in the sky, all 5 visible planets are above the horizon and visible after dark throughout the end of December. This week, though, is the best time to spot elusive Mercury, which is usually lost in the sun's glare. Towards the end of this week, it's at its greatest elongation east, or separation from the sun. Look southeast after sunset for Venus near the horizon, followed by tiny Mercury, and then spread out a bit more, Saturn, Jupiter, and finally Mars in the east. The crescent moon joins the show on Christmas night. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, 24 tornadoes were confirmed on December 16th, 2000. Half of those were in the state of Alabama, including the strongest of the day. It was a devastating F4 that pushed 18 miles through Tuscaloosa County. 11 were killed and 144 were injured. The tornado developed in the southwestern part of the county on the west side of the Black Warrior River and moved to the northeast. It hit home south of Shelton State Community College. As it crossed State Route 69, it hit a shopping center, including a Winn-Dixie. East of this area, a residential area was struck. At US 82, a number of mobile homes were destroyed and several of the deaths occurred here. There was minor damage to the JVC manufacturing facility at Interstate 2059. At exit 77 of this interstate, several hotels, fast food restaurants, and truck stops were damaged and several cars overturned. 9 fatalities occurred in mobile homes, 1 in a vehicle and 1 in a commercial building converted to residential use. A photo made its way to many newspapers after this event occurred. It was taken by Michael E. Palmer of the Tuscaloosa News. It showed Michael Harris carrying the body of an unconscious 6-year-old girl from her damaged mobile home. He rescued her from the rubble. That little girl is now a young woman with a family of her own. Her name, Whitney Crowder Daly. Tragically, Whitney lost her father and baby brother that horrible day. Her brother was the youngest victim of this tornado. Calling all weather enthusiasts, join the AMS Weather Band and become part of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll get to go behind the scenes with the 10,000 plus scientists, broadcasters, educators, and researchers of the AMS. The AMS Weather Band brings together weather professionals and weather enthusiasts. Band members can grow their knowledge and appreciation of weather and climate by participating in virtual events, online discussions, Q&As, AMAs, webinars, photo contests, and more. AMS Weather Band gives you the opportunity to interact directly with those in the scientific community. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
All right, it is time to dig into that good old email inbox, and just maybe there's something in there.
We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right, it's been a couple of weeks, I think, since we've done some emails. So I went digging into the mailbag and pulled out a few. And this one takes us back all the way toward Thanksgiving time. And this is from our friend James Lewis. He had a couple of questions about the most severe radar gap in the US. Where do you guys think that is? And where in the country would you place a new weather radar? I don't think we've asked that question yet. You guys have any place?
York, Alabama, Meridian, Mississippi, Butler, Alabama, Demopolis, Alabama.
You can't have
beam
all
height
those.
over 10,000 feet. We used to have a radar at Meridian, an old WSR 74 at Key Field, and that was decommissioned in 1996. And that's a severe gap in a very tornado-prone part of the country. It's bad. And
so what's the definition of the distance you have to be apart to consider a radar gap? Because like tonight looks like Perryton, Texas would be a bad place for one.
Well, to me, it's the beam height. When the beam height gets over 10,000 feet, you're hosed. You got no hope.
It is in those storms tonight in the Panhandle. So that's a good point.
I think Rick and I would have great agreement in this question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. If there were such a thing as radar gaps, which I'm not saying there are, but if there were, one would be in southeast Oklahoma.
So the one at Durant going to make a big difference, Rick?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, that's one of those can't see anything below 10,000 feet locations, and got an update on that. It's installation keeps getting pushed back, but looks like now installation in mid-January is going to start. But yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Let me guess, supply chain probably.
That's all supply chain. Yeah, absolutely. But it keeps getting delayed. But yeah, we're super excited for that one.
Yeah, Northeast Arkansas, Southeast Missouri is one, and Southeast Kansas also pretty bad.
And doesn't Panovich, he's griping about one over there in North Carolina somewhere, isn't he?
Charlotte is the largest metro
Charlotte.
area without an 88D, I believe.
Okay.
East of the Rockies.
All right.
Great. Awesome. This was from early December. This was written on a Friday from Steve Holmes. And so he was looking at some storms that happened the previous Tuesday. One or two Met said showers to the south of tornadic supercells could impede their inflow. Is it possible for a tornadic setup to have too much moisture? Yes. Oh man, it got really quiet.
I was looking at like, hey Rick, I know. He's up in office and sure does issue a lot of tornado warnings.
I already answered one question. I'm answering an important text message here, so sorry.
It was to me. Joseph sent me something to pass along to Rick, so it's my fault. I will say, I think the comment, so the question kind of gets at a piece of things that can be difficult. I don't know that you can have too much moisture, but if it's in the wrong place. So if you are getting, the outflow from one storm that's getting ingested into another, that can be destructive to the other storm. And you tend to look for inflow that's orthogonal to the line, especially along warm fronts. You get such a mess of things so easily because it's a very difficult condition to meet. So anyway, all that to say, it's not necessarily, I think, the presence of moisture and there being too much. It's about the orientation of the storms, their movement, and whether that moisture that's available is helpful or destructive to the structure of the storm. I'm seeing some nods.
And we've had a lot of situations in Alabama and the southeast where, convection along the Gulf Coast will impede the moisture path northward, and storms over the central parts of some of the Gulf Coast states of moisture. And so we get that from time to time here.
Excellent. All right, one more for us here, and this came from the end of November as well, from a longtime listener, Joey Amberson. And I was actually privy to this conversation that happened in the Tornado Talk Discord server about the 1000th episode of WeatherBrains will actually be on St. Patty's Day in 2025. And the hope here is that former panelists can be present for the show, and they think that we should have it in person, and all of us get together and hang out for St. Patty's Day. So we have to come up with an awesome place to meet and have a green beer. So I thought that was.
Well, I've got a green screen over here.
Yeah, it's just like we're drinking nothing. Exactly. Awesome. So if you have suggestions on where we should meet for our 1000th show, if we can make it there to 2025, shoot us an email at weatherbrains.com. We love getting your emails. If we can't get your message on the show, I do try to reply back to you, let you know we did see it, and we get your guest suggestions and all that too. So thank you so much for writing to us and for watching us every week. Back to you, Span.
I'm trying to think the last live show we did was that at one of these NWA. I guess we do NWA most every year. We did one bill at the barbecue joint in Leeds. That was fun.
Yeah, that was early on too.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. We had people come off the interstate that they were listening and they drive. It's like an old radio remote, but no, I agree.
Huck's Rib Shack or something like that.
Yeah, and of course it doesn't exist It doesn't exist anymore. We shut that thing down. I mean, they didn't last much longer. But no, we need to pick a good site that's kind of neutral where people can get in there and maybe a fly-in or something. I don't know, but
Memphis. We'll go to Memphis
with our feet 10 feet off of Beale. Yeah, Wesley's Booby Trap Lounge. That'd be a good one.
That was suggested in the Tornado Talk server too. They think that would be
yeah, Wesley's Booby Trap Lounge in Dora, Alabama. That would be good. In fact, I tell you what, I've actually got a book signing. I just posted this on the face bag. I got a book signing in Summerton on Saturday. So what I need to do is go by the Booby Trap on the way back from the book signing and say, hey, would you mind hosting us for our 1000th show in 2025? And see what they say. Or maybe not.
You better go to the Green Top, not the Booby Trap.
All right, let's do picks of the week. This is where we go around the horn. Everybody shares something that is weather related. And let's start with James A., since he's got to be on Action News, live, local, late breaking, 9:00, Action News, severe weather team. So James A., what you got for us?
What I've got is a FEMA storyboard from the tornadoes that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And it's kind of a collection of a lot of GIS resources for people that want to run back and look at some of the path and some of the pictures along. I think there's a link to the NWS damage toolkit there for the event as well. So it's a neat repository of lots of GIS information for this terrible night in December last year.
Awesome. And again, all the pics will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. So Jen, what do you have for us this week?
So I'm going to do two picks that are connected. The first one is our summary that we just completed. It took 4 of us to write this. It was one of the most overwhelmingly heavy summaries we've done. It's called The Immeasurable Cost of the December 10th and 11th, 2021 Tornado Outbreak. And we wrote about the 23 significant tornadoes, but that was just the smallest piece. We wrote 92 stories about the 92 people that died during the outbreak. And I wrote personally all the ones from Mayfield. So I did 57, and our co-writer Zach did the others. And it was hard, but it was so important for us to share these stories because there were so many that were important. part of that summary, Nelson Tucker put together a video, and I've shared that. And it was really neat what he did. He said, many have told me radar is a paint bucket to them and ignore broadcasters over it. I made this video to show how radar of the Western 2021 Kentucky, so the Mayfield supercell and tornado, how it equates to the damage. So he shows reflectivity and then the velocity and the CC. And then in the next corner, he shows what damage occurred. It was very powerful, in my opinion, because it showed we don't just talk about the colors because they're pretty. They mean something to us, and that's what we're trying to convey. It does mean, and we do care. And so I shared that as well because I thought that was just really impactful what he put together.
Awesome. Good deal. And again, really quickly, my pick is kind of based on your audio this week, Jen, This Week in Tornado History. December 16th, 2000, we had that F4 tornado that came through parts of Tuscaloosa. And it was interesting. It was a Saturday. And we were on a Saturday, 9 days before Christmas. You're kind of short-staffed. And we were live, of course, and we caught that thing on a camera, one of the earliest ones we've gotten here on a camera. And anyway, live coverage of that event is it'll be my pick of the week. And you mentioned Whitney Daly in your audio, Jen. We communicate every year on December 16th, and she has grown into this amazing young woman. And you know, when you see that photograph of her, it looks like it's a lifeless body that he's carrying out of there. But anyway, she's doing fine, and it's always great to get an update on her every year. But anyway, that's my pick of the week. All right, Kim, let's go to you. What do you have for us this week?
My pick of the week is something sort of shamelessly stolen from Rick. He sent out a partner's email that I'm on that list, and I thought this was a great resource to share with our viewers as well. The Storm Prediction Center has a partners page where, on the theme of GIS, they have put out information in just a number of different formats that'll be really relatable to a number of different kinds of users. So you can now see information based on your FEMA region and just other kinds of geographies that are really relevant to the layers of organizations that are all involved in communicating, kind of the topic of tonight and responding. There are a lot of different ways we can slice our country into a lot of different kinds of populations and a lot of organizations that oversee the chain of responsibility for those people. So a really neat resource to check out.
Excellent. All right, Rick Smith, what you got for us this week?
Kind of going back to the December 10th and 11th event, Weather Service is getting more into the story map world, or GIS, these very cool visual ways to show data and show events. And all the Weather Service offices involved, I don't know if it's all of them, but Paducah, Memphis, Louisville, Nashville got together and have a storyboard of the entire event from beginning to end, with just lots of cool animations and pictures and really high quality stuff. So that's my pick.
Good deal. And again, this will be on weatherbrains.com. Joseph, we've stalled. We tried to give you time to come up with something good, and I think you've got something good. So go.
We got something awesome ready for y'all. Shameless plug here. I'll link a little if you want to dig in a little bit more and learn more about the untold stories of the December 10 to 11 tornado outbreak. We submitted our manuscript in a preprint format, meaning that it is not officially peer-reviewed. I actually got those reviews back today, so it'll get even sharper in future iterations of it. So this is just what we would call the rough draft in the research world. But you know what? There's a lot of valuable information here. The link attached has a PDF, and starting at page 14, you can read all of the quotes coming from immigrant and Spanish speaking communities. Super duper powerful stuff. Pages 14 all the way to 21. You can read all of those insights. And so, that's the research report we wrote alongside with Kim as a co-author, and looking forward to publishing it in the future. But hey, give it a read.
Outstanding. All right, Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, James, I'm going to yield half of my time to the Honorable WCM from Oklahoma, who has an important question to ask Joseph. But I wanted to point out, Tony was talking about SWAT, in his segment tonight. James, have you ever heard of dowsing? James Spann, the practice of using a divining rod, a forked stick, or some sort of other pointing device. Kim would really love.
I think I saw that on Bugs Bunny one time. He was trying to find some water with Elmer Fudd. Yeah.
Joey Braxton, and you probably know him, James, the Alabama Center for Traditional Culture. He does a great show on PBS here called Journey Proud. And, I'm a little skeptical of the process, but these people really believe in it. And I thought that was interesting to compare and contrast Tony's use of a satellite to do that to someone walking around with a forked stick doing it. So, but anyway, before I get in trouble, I will just mention that Greg Carbon will join us next Monday night for his meteorological memories, and friends of the podcast, Robin Reed and Chris White, will join us as well. And thanks to Joseph for being here tonight. He always adds so much to the show. And I'll yield the rest of my time to Rick Smith.
Yeah, just real quick. We were having this discussion offline, but weather radio is an important way that people get warnings. And I guess there's a handful of Spanish language transmitters. I guess it wasn't as many as I thought, but Joseph, you had some stats on that. How many there? I guess there are dedicated transmitters scattered in a few places across the country, Spanish language. I mean, how is it like 5 or 6? I can't remember.
Yeah, right around 5 as of the last time we try to get some information. We're currently writing actually a manuscript that just overviews Spanish history and the future of it. And so far, weather radio exists in WFOs in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Brownsville, Texas, El Paso, Texas, Miami, Florida, and San Diego, California. And so, yeah, no, it's so I guess just locally it's available to them. I wanted to double check on it too. The translation teams have helped them kind of automate some parts of that information. And of course, a lot of those places also have Spanish language forecasters that are able to help out with that information. But yeah, I do think weather radio in different languages can serve as something effective in the future. And only a few WFOs also have web pages that have an option for Espanol, the most recent one being Paducah. A huge shout out to them after the event, after reading up on, they gave us an opportunity to present to their office. They were just like, no, we want to take action like literally right now. I have never seen a WFO be so motivated to get this done. And like, a couple months later, there was a Spanish language website that we relayed out to the local community there, and just so happy to work with them over there. And yeah, but there's a lot of great stuff happening locally.
I regret not taking Spanish in high school. I took 2 years of Latin, and they told me it's going to help you every day for the rest of your life. And there was a time when I was younger where I could say the pirates kill the inhabitants in Latin. And that lasted for about 5 years, and I forgot it now. So, that's what it did for me. But I really regret not taking Spanish. The Latin thing, maybe it's okay, I guess, if you're going to the medical field or something, but it just didn't work out well for me. So I regret that. But
I took it in high school, but it didn't help, James. So I need to go back and relearn what I learned in high school. Well, but I've named myself on the screen here tonight.
I just wish I could remember the pirates killed the inhabitants. That I knew how to say that in Latin, and I was so proud of myself. And now I've forgotten that. So
look, I try to be trilingual. I try to learn French. Oh my goodness, that did not click whatsoever. Like I regret that completely. I was like, I'm trying to learn another language. Yeah, no, that did not work out for me. But hey, James, it's never too late. You want to learn Spanish? Hit me up.
Yeah, there you go. See, it's never too late. It is never too late to learn these things. I have learned that. But Joseph, plug away. If you need to plug any social media accounts, anything, go. This is your plugorama. Go for it.
Ooh, let's do it. I'm on Twitter at LatinWX. I try to keep it themed here. We do, part of this is I also am not only in the research space, but also do a lot of great stuff reaching out to the communities and more risk communication more directly through the My Radar and Espanol page. So we do information in Spanish nationwide, really on big events. And so it's always fun to also be on that perspective of it too, to really get, what's the best way to learn to actually be a part of it. And so I've really got a lot of wonderful information there. So yeah, no, definitely give me a follow, give everybody here a follow. Goodness gracious, all wonderful people. But yeah.
Awesome. All right. So Bill Murray, let's see. Next, we're doing just the one show this week. We're going through the logistics of the year ender here. So next week we have Greg Carbon Monday night, right? On the 19th. That's a week from tonight.
That's right.
And then we have a
and then
Thursday
we have
night special.
David Schultz from the University of Manchester, which actually came out of the weather band because he did one of the presentations that they root in civilian citizen science. And he's going to join us from England that night by staying up really, really late. And that's going to be a lot of fun. And then we're going to have the second edition of our Christmas tradition that we started last year with author Janet Chestnut on Christmas Eve morning. James at 8 a.m. is going to play that fabulous narrative that Ken Osborne voiced for us last year. So if you get a chance on Christmas Eve morning at 8 a.m. Central Time, tune into the YouTube channel and you'll see that there, right, James? And then after that, we'll go over to the new year, and Nick Pittman's going to join us on the 2nd. We've got a Penn State show on the 16th, and John Bangoff will be back on the 23rd. We're going to talk about Waymo on the 30th. We got a lot of great shows after the first of the year. The first available date we have is February 27th. So it's going to be a fun start to the year here on WeatherBrains. And if you see us laughing, if you're watching on video, if you ever see us laughing at inappropriate times, it is entirely James A's fault.
Exactly.
Because,
Yeah.
he is always the quickest one with the funniest line, and always has us in stitches, and we appreciate that.
Hey, and Jen, don't forget, I'll be speaking at the Ohio State University in February.
Yep, I'll be there.
Be like the 10th and 11th. So that's going to be a ton of fun. But we got to go. WeatherBrains is typically on the air every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And for those that watch our YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But most of you listen in your favorite podcast app. However you consume the show, thanks a lot. The email address, if you want to get in touch with us, it is email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. Thanks, everybody. Great show.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, Joseph.
Yeah.
That was great.
Joseph, thank you.
Great.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah,
Makes
great
me
show
kind of proud
tonight.
to be an American.